everybody, and welcome back to the convention floor of the Golden Silent Films podcast, where we are preparing ourselves for one of the coolest movie conventions in the land. We are a podcast made by avid convention goers and love sharing the world of convention going with you, our fine, so very fine listeners. And the Columbus Moving Picture Show should be familiar with some of you long-time listeners. Last year, we recorded our first ever on-location episode from the Columbus Moving Picture Show convention. It was an awesome experience to see so many classic movies on film and with live accompaniment as they were always intended. It was so cool to be surrounded by so many like-minded individuals. Because of that, we wanted to learn more about the convention itself as the showrunners prepare for the 2025 edition. Before we dive deep into the convention conversation, let's talk about the various Golden Silent Films podcast social media outlets. As usual, head on over to Golden Silence Cast on Instagram for up-to-date info on this little podcast. We are also on Bluesky, where you can find us at Golden Silence Cast. And for all of you folks on X or Twitter, just follow at Golden Silence 1, or just search Golden Silence Cast and we ought to pop up. All of those screen names and sites will be in the episode description in case you're interested in attending our social media spaces. We would love to have you following along with us as we strive to get the most out of this year's busy convention season. At these social hangouts, you get behind-the-scenes pics and info, upcoming episode reveals, and other fun film-related materials. And, of course, there's always fun photos of our unconventional podcasts, Gizmo and Soda. Also, if you're listening to this program on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Amazon Music, please be kind and leave a comment, review, a rating, or all of the above. Our show has been around for 5 years, and we've only received 17 reviews on iTunes. We would love to see those numbers grow, and you awesome silent film fans out there can definitely make it happen. All of those ratings and reviews help so very much. Live your best review-leaving life and help our show grow a little and reach fellow silent film fans across the world. Dropping those reviews gives us more exposure in the world of podcasts and lets us know how we can improve. As always, we are grateful for the feedback and always want to bring you the best show humanly possible. And please subscribe to the Golden Silent Films podcast. While our output can be sketchy and somewhat unpredictable, if you are subscribed, you will never miss an episode, and the moment new content drops, it's going to go straight to your listening device of choice. We are well into our 5th season now and don't want you to miss a single solitary second. And as for YouTube, we are pushing to get over 100 subscribers before 2026, so you know those magic words: like, comment, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. Oh yeah, before we move on to the episode, one other thing. Stay tuned after the show for a big announcement regarding the Golden Silent Films podcast and a special episode we are working on. It's a really cool idea we've been kicking around for a while that we finally get to bring to life. And it's going to be especially cool for all of you great movie fans attending this year's Columbus Moving Picture Show. Now, the magic of a convention really comes from being surrounded by so many like-minded individuals, all sharing the communal experience of something everyone in attendance loves. And the impact of that experience is only amplified when you are staying at the convention hotel and your life, for several days at least, revolves around the theme of that particular convention. And I'm not kidding when I say I'm a convention professional. I've done it all and I've seen it all, from Star Trek conventions and tractor conventions to furry conventions and horror film conventions and pretty much everything in between. I've been to them all. So when I say the Columbus Moving Picture Show is a special one, I say this from a vast catalog of con-going experiences. My first trip to the Columbus Moving Picture Show came in 2024, and it immediately hooked me. It took all the things I love most about conventions and put them all together. From film screenings and panel discussions to an incredible vendor area, this one had it all. But unfortunately, the one thing I didn't really do was enjoy the moment. Anytime you're doing something for the first time, it's hard to look at things from a wider perspective. I was in a new city, interacting with new people, and being exposed to so much new film-related content. I was too consumed by figuring out where to go, what movie was starting when, and what I was going to buy next. As often happens with me, I didn't really allow myself to sit back and appreciate what the Columbus Moving Picture Show really was. By the time I was comfortable and in the Columbus classic film zone and mindset, the weekend was wrapping up and I was left wanting more. and thus the year-long wait began again. So, I wanted to rectify those mistakes of the past and better prepare you fine filmgoers and convention goers for the 2025 edition of the Columbus Moving Picture Show. And there is no one better to talk about all things Columbus Moving Picture Show than with Samantha Glasser, director of the Columbus Moving Picture Show. So, welcome to the Golden Silent Films podcast, Samantha.
I'm excited to talk with you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Usually we use the biography section of the podcast to talk about the life and times of someone associated with the silent era. But we're going to switch things up a little bit by looking at the history and evolution of this convention with you, Samantha. Like I talked about earlier, there was so much to see and do that really the origin story of this convention kind of passed me by. Now, no convention is ever an overnight success. They are built on lots of hard work, years and years of preparation by people who love what they are doing. And the story behind the creation of the Columbus Moving Picture Show is an incredible story of cinephiles unwilling to let a popular movie convention be lost to the sands of time. So, Samantha, please take us through the history, the backstory, and the lore of the Columbus Moving Picture Show.
The Columbus Moving Picture Show was started because Cinevent was winding down, and I didn't want it to end. Cinevent ran in Columbus for 52 years. The last of the founders died in 2015, so it could have ended then, but Steve Haynes' son Michael took over the show and kept it going for a few more years. He saw my passion for the show and offered to turn over the reins and train me on how to make the show happen. My first show was in 2022, just after our first convention post-COVID, and it was a rocky start, but it seems to get smoother every year.
It's really fascinating to see and hear that the Columbus Moving Picture Show kind of sprang forth from the ashes of a previous event. Now, I want to dive into that previous convention momentarily, but first, I want to learn a little bit more about you. Tell us, Samantha, about your journey to classic film.
I started ravenously watching old movies in high school. I wanted to be an actress, but I had this moment when I realized that no matter how hard I worked or how lucky I got, I'd never be able to reach the heights of the stars of the black and white era, and that I'd be spending my efforts more wisely to try to revive and perpetuate their careers through preservation. I studied journalism in college with a minor in film, but I didn't want to move out of Ohio to work in an archive. And honestly, I didn't even know how to go about learning the necessary skills to do that, so I just maintained my interest in film as a hobby. It wasn't until my volunteering for Cinevent was recognized as a way to pass the torch that I had any real participation in serving film.
I can tell you are a podcaster yourself. That is the perfect segue to take us from your experiences and journeys back to the aforementioned Cinevent. Now, a lot of folks enjoy movies, but not many could predict that they would be at the head of a whole classic film convention. That is definitely a bit of a twist on the story. So take us back to that era of Cinevent. From what I understand, it was an incredibly long-running event in the Columbus area, right?
Cinevent was a film convention that ran in Columbus for 52 years. It was originally a traveling show where film collectors got together to trade and run films, and then it settled down here because there was a local group who was willing to run it. And then over time it grew to be one of the biggest gatherings of movie memorabilia in the whole country. I have some old posters and program books from Cinevents before my time. My first year was in 2007. And I always wish that I had a time machine so that I could go back and attend the shows and see the films that they ran and talk to the people that we've lost. God, wouldn't that be an amazing vacation? May has always felt like a second Christmas because of the show.
I know exactly how you feel. I totally understand it. Being the Star Trek nerd that I am, I've always dreamed, about going back to those early Star Trek conventions of the 70s and the 80s and just seeing what it was like to be there in the moment. And I also do keep the con books and flyers of conventions I have attended and quite often look back fondly on those shows I've attended and really dream about reliving those experiences. So we're of like minds there for sure. Now, speaking of con books, I got to shout out you and the convention for your amazing con book. Now, if you're unaware, the Columbus Moving Picture Show has the best con book in the business. It is basically a novel or scholarly tome packed with info on each film being screened. But we will get into that in a little bit. Now, another thing we have in common is our love of silent film, and since this is a silent film podcast, I would be remiss in my hosting duties if I didn't pick your brain a little bit about silent movies for a little bit. One of the things I love about the Columbus Moving Picture Show is how much love the silents get. They get a spotlight that they really so richly deserve. So that being said, silent cinema can sometimes be forgotten when it comes to classic films. Why is it so important to include silent films in the overall CMPS experience?
The first time I ever heard live music with a silent movie was at Cinevent, and it was a surprisingly invigorating experience. I didn't think it would make a huge difference, but it really did. Hearing the whir of the projector combined with the resonance of the piano, it's a transporting experience. It drowns out all your stress from the outside world and takes you back in time. It wasn't even a question of whether we would continue showing silent movies at the show. Of course we would. We have two wonderful pianists on staff. David Drazen has a distinctive jazzy style that just feels like Cinevent to me. And Dr. Philip Carley has this grand way of playing that really enhances the emotional impact of the films.
I could not agree more with your feelings about hearing that live music along with these classic films. Now, on top of that, you are spot on in describing the talents of David Drazen and Dr. Philip Carley. Last year's event, like I mentioned earlier, was a bit of a blur to me. There was so much to take in. But one distinct memory I still have was how incredibly talented those two gentlemen are and how much they added to each film they played music for. And I can't wait to see what they bring to this year's event. It's going to be fantastic from the musicianship side of things, to be sure. As is now customary and my duty to make this an official episode, I got to ask about your history with silent films and hear about some of your silent film favorites. I can tell from the makeup of the convention that silents are quite important to you in the overall classic film landscape.
The first silent feature I ever saw was Mary Pickford in Daddy Longlegs. And to this day, she is one of my absolute favorite actresses, not just of the silent era, of any era. She was beautiful and graceful and spunky, and her screen presence would be enough to make her a favorite of mine, but her incredible business ability impresses me so much too. She was a delicate-looking woman in a man's world who put herself in a position of power in spite of the fact that she wasn't really welcome there. She just made it happen and sustained it for decades. My Best Girl and Sparrows are my favorite of her silents. I really gravitate toward female stars of the silent era. I love Clara Bow, and I love her in The Plastic Age, and of course Wings. I love Marion Davies in Quality Street and Show People. I want to see more Viola Dana movies, more Norma Talmadge movies, more Florence Vidor movies, more Alan Asimova movies. As far as the men go, Harold Lloyd and Speedy is a lot of fun. Chaplin, of course, City Lights and The Gold Rush are so heartbreaking. I know there's comedies, but there's so much pathos in his movies that really just get you and dig in. Lon Chaney is great in everything. I really love Laugh Clown Laugh and The Unknown. Metropolis is an astounding movie. I've seen it many times. Beau Jest needs to get a Blu-ray release. I could go on and on and on and on and on about this.
If only either of us had a podcast dedicated completely to classic films, we could let this conversation really go on forever. But in all seriousness, I can completely understand you when you say you could talk forever about silent films. It is a topic with so much depth and so many different avenues to go down. And I am not just saying that because I have a silent film podcast. It really is actually true. And just in your answer alone were a number of movies I've never seen, which are promptly going to be added to my list. Whether it's the films on tap for the convention or just movies you name drop in conversation, you have a great power and knack for introducing me to so many new films I was unaware of. Speaking of new-to-me films, let's turn our attention to the convention proper. Whilst I love modern cinema and silent cinema, I have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to the classic films that occupy that middle zone. The 40s and the 50s are a wide-open world to me, and one of the things I love most about the Columbus Moving Picture Show is that I know I am going to learn about so many good and great films that I had no idea even existed. But before we get into the great film lineup, which is incredible this year, Samantha, walk us through what a first-time attendee at the Columbus Moving Picture Show can expect.
I always think of it as a 3-part show. We have more than 100 dealer tables to shop where you can buy things like original movie posters and press books, lobby cards, stills, sheet music, vintage magazines, records, books, 8mm, 16mm, 35mm film, DVDs and Blu-rays. Or you can just browse because it's a visual feast to see some of these amazing artifacts of our film history. One of the things that makes us different from Cinevent is that we host seminars where experts, which are oftentimes authors, will give talks on their area of expertise. This year, Richard S. Green will talk about how the studios marketed comedy stars like W.C. Fields, Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, and Martin and Lewis. Randy Skredvet will talk about his love of Laurel and Hardy and his experiences meeting and becoming friendly with many of the people that worked with the boys. Thomas J. Slater will talk about the silent film screenwriter June Mathis, who wrote the film Irene starring Colleen Moore and who worked with Rudolph Valentino in several films. And then Christopher Connolly will talk about the torch singer Helen Morgan and her association with Florian Ziegfeld and her work in the movies. That's just a taste of the seminars that we're offering. And then, of course, the film screening room is a draw as well.
That all sounds amazing, and I'm sure that everyone out there listening would completely agree. When I was there last year, Samantha, the dealer's den was truly mind-blowing. I was completely unprepared for how truly expansive it was. There was so much to look at, though, as I moved from table to table. If I didn't mention it last year, I spent a pretty penny and went home with way more than when I left. I was able to add quite a bit to my movie collection that encompassed all of my favorites of the silent world. One of my favorites in the silent era and beyond are the works of Cecil B. DeMille. I picked up a ton of his DVDs while I was there in 2024, and looking forward to this year's event, I'm super excited to see DeMille's 1917 production of The Little American starring Mary Pickford is going to be screened. Now, at last year's convention, I also picked up a Blu-ray of The Midnight Girl starring show favorite Lila Lee and Bela Lugosi. This was super cool because it has a musical score from David Drazen. You really never know what gems you'll end up going home with. Now, last year when I wasn't hoarding physical media and vintage knickknacks, I was definitely learning something in the seminars. One of the best parts of any convention is the opportunity to leave with more knowledge than I entered with as well. As I drove off last year, I had so many thoughts running through my head. Luckily, I had a long drive home to mentally pack away all those great bits of information and trivia that I had accumulated over the weekend. Some of my favorite moments from last year's event were the seminars I was lucky enough to attend. Two that were standouts for me were author Dale Van Ness talking about the life and career of Columbus native Warner Baxter, and James DeArc discussing his book When Hollywood Came to Utah. Both topics were completely new to me, so I really enjoyed the deep dives those authors provided. It's always fun to learn about stuff you never even knew existed, and those are just a couple standouts from a jam-packed and full schedule. And you just mentioned it, Samantha, but we can't pass up the opportunity to discuss the moving pictures that are so incredibly integral to the Columbus Moving Picture Show experience. You have so much great stuff lined up for this year's screening room that I don't even know where to begin. So, Director, I will turn the floor over to you to run down some of your picks for this year's features and shorts.
If you like action and adventure, you can start off each day with 3 chapters of the serial Zorro Rides Again. Obviously, as a Mary Pickford fan, I like to show her films when we can. This year we are showing The Little American, a World War I drama that she made with Cecil B. DeMille, which is a departure from her typical little girl roles. Scott Eyman will introduce that screening. Comedy fans can see W.C. Fields in several films, including the silent It's the Old Army Game, which also features Louise Brooks, preceded by a few minutes of footage, the only surviving materials on the lost film That Royal Girl. There has been a 20-minute clip from the musical Close Harmony from 1929 starring Nancy Carroll and Buddy Rogers floating around for a long time, but seeing the full feature has been elusive. We will be screening that on Thursday. Two people whose films we often show without necessarily trying to are Lloyd Nolan and Lynn Barry, and this year we'll have them together in Pier 13, a crime drama. We like to show schlock, too, so this year we're running A Big Bug Movie, the Burt I. Gordon giant grasshopper film, Beginning of the End.
Those are some really great flicks, to be sure, and I look forward to seeing as many of them as I can. And again, the notepad is out, and I am taking notes and highlighting them, and I hope to see as many of them as I can. Now, I have a list of my own Stewart's picks of films I want to catch while I'm there as well. Aside from the aforementioned DeMille and Pickford flick, I'm also excited to see 1926's Irene for the first time. We're huge Colleen Moore fans here, and that is a must-see, and doubly so because it's going to have an intro by Thomas Slater. Now, as much as we love silence, we have a lot to learn about 40s and 50s films. Longtime listeners know that Wings is one of our all-time favorite movies, sound or no sound. And in addition to the Buddy Rogers picture you mentioned, you're also bringing us some more Richard Arlen aerial action with 1941's Flying Blind. Both of those guys are awesome, so those are two films that are not going to be missed. Now, if you caught our Snow White episode, you should put Miss Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch on your short list as well. Marguerite Clark is a gem in the famous fairy tale, so it's super fortuitous that you are screening this film when you are. Basically, long story short, the Columbus Moving Picture Show has a film being screened to fit any and all tastes in cinema. And as a reminder, many of these have live musical accompaniment and intros. It's super cool how above and beyond you go to make this convention an immersive experience. Now, another thing about the Columbus Moving Picture Show that you do to immerse each con-goer in the experience is put out, in my opinion, the best con book in the business. A lot of conventions will put out a pamphlet or a single page breaking down the day's events and times. But like many other facets, you take the traditional and you really amp it up.
Our program book is about 60 pages long, and it includes extensive notes on each of the films that we screen. They're written by a variety of film experts, including preservationist Eric Grayson of Dr. Film fame, authors Richard Barrios, Thomas J. Slater, and James Dark. It came from the bottom shelf blogger William Garver, and collectors Dave Domagala and Jim Harwood, and more. It also includes ads from this year's supporters and photos of the posters and lobby cards from the films that we're screening. It's handy to keep around for the duration of the show because it includes the schedules for the seminars and book signings too, but it makes a great souvenir. I've got several older ones. I have a collection of them. I've often gone back to old program books to get a sense of what the Cinevents of years past would have been like and read the notes to tantalize myself about the movies I still need to seek out. I've got quite a few in my collection. The oldest one is from 1974, back when it was just a list of the titles.
By the time this episode releases, you'll be happy to know that I still have my 2024 con book on hand, and you'll see it in various photos. It's still a great read and is evergreen content. So, whatever time and money and effort you spent into making it was definitely worth it. I mean, I spent so much time at last year's convention reading that thing. It really did enhance the overall experience because I was able to go into different screenings with at least a baseline knowledge of the film at hand. And as someone with a terrible memory, it really helped as I worked on the convention wrap-up episode I did last year for the podcast. On the topic of podcasting, I've touched on it a few times as the episode has progressed, but you are a fellow podcaster. You're a host on the Columbus Moving Picture Show podcast. Now, the podcast celebrates all things vintage film, 60s and earlier, and I am a huge fan of the show, and as a Wizard of Oz nut, I really enjoyed the recent episode looking at Cleveland native Margaret Hamilton. Like the convention, the Columbus Moving Picture Show podcast really opens my eyes to a lot of films and stories and lore that I knew nothing about.
I'm glad you like our podcast. It was the brainchild of our producer, Caroline Brader Watts, who has lots of experience with the audio format. We wanted to originally preserve the memories of people who had attended Cinevent over the years, as well as talk about topics within the classic movie hobby and preview the event each year. But it has evolved to also spotlight and celebrate important people, actors, writers, directors, who worked in the industry and who came from Ohio. We keep it under 30 minutes, so it's an easy listen each month.
It is a great listen, not just an easy listen. As a podcaster who tries to celebrate and champion the film history of Pittsburgh, I appreciate your dedication to the cinematic history of Columbus and Ohio in general. So if you find listeners want to give the Columbus Moving Picture Show podcast a listen, it is available on most, if not all, the usual podcast suspects. And if you are heading out to the convention, be sure to listen ahead of time for a full preview from the folks at the Columbus Moving Picture Show podcast. It will definitely get you all set up for 4 days of film fun. With this special convention-centric episode winding down, we want to thank you for spending your valuable convention-going time with us. It's been fantastic learning the history of a convention we here at the home office love so much. Any convention is incredibly hard to pull off, so it was really cool to learn all about the stuff that goes into the making of the Columbus Moving Picture Show and how to make it work. It's also super cool to chat with Samantha and hear all the great stuff on the slate for this year's edition. We are incredibly pumped to be making the return trip in just a couple months. Did you enjoy this look back at the classic film convention world? What are some of your favorite conventions to attend? Which film conventions and festivals should we feature next? Tell us your story. Tell us your experiences. Let us know all those convention-y details and more at the various social media spots of the Golden Silent Films podcast. We also can't end this episode without a huge thank you to Samantha Glasser for joining us. It was great getting to spend time talking to someone who loves movies as much as we do. There is so much to talk about, and this episode could literally go on forever without ever running out of a topic. And we will have you back on for sure for more movie chat sessions in the future. But in the meantime, Samantha, please let everyone know where they can find out more about the Columbus Moving Picture Show.
Thanks for having me on the show. I always enjoy hearing your deep dives into silent movies, so I'm proud to be included in this. Anybody who's interested in finding out more about the Columbus Moving Picture Show can check out our website, columbusmovingpictureshow.com, or send us an email, columbusmovingpictureshow@gmail.com. And you can buy discounted tickets in advance of the show, May 22nd through 25th on our website. And you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
On that note, if you are suffering those post-con episode blues and your memory is weakened and tired, we are on Instagram, Twitter, and now Bluesky. Let us know what you thought of this episode, and what silent and silent-related movies, past or present, or conventions past or present, do you want us to look at next? Our world of silent movie knowledge convention experience is constantly expanding, and we need your input for future episodes here and far beyond. You can always find us at the Golden Silence Cast on Instagram, and at Golden Silence 1 on Twitter, and at Golden Silence Cast on Bluesky. And again, if you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or any other podcast outlet that allows it, subscribe, rate, and review. If you're watching it on YouTube, like, subscribe, and comment. It does a ton for our visibility, and we love hearing your thoughts and ideas. We currently sit at around 30 subscribers on YouTube with a goal of getting 100 YouTube subscribers during the year of 2025. So please subscribe and spread the word so other cool folks can subscribe as well. This is a big party, and we want to share it with as many people as possible. We really appreciate all of your incredible support, and seeing how much you find folks are listening on all of our many platforms only makes us want to make our episodes the best they can be. We have really been pushing things this season to bring you some more great content, more great episodes, and just more of everything in general. This podcast is a labor of love, and having had 3 episodes in a row with amazing guests is a big step forward for us, and shows we're on a good track of growth, and that you needn't worry. There is still a lot of cool stuff in the pipeline for 2025 and beyond. So, with all of that being said, thank you to all of you fine listeners for all of your fine listening. And don't forget, the silents are golden and the talkies are just a fad. And support conventions. It's that moment you've all been waiting for, special announcement time. For all of you film fanatics and hopefully listeners of this podcast attending the 2025 Columbus Moving Picture Show Convention, we have an awesome announcement. One of the films being screened is the Lon Chaney film False Faces, and we are going to be doing some special content for that screening. We're going to be doing an episode featuring a deep dive into the film that is going to be released on the first day of the convention. So that means as soon as you leave the screening of False Faces, you can fire up your listening device of choice and get the backstory on that great Lon Chaney film. It's a perfect combination of podcast and movie synergy and a little extra content for you fine convention goers. But it's also going to be some great information if you can't make it to the Columbus Moving Picture Show. Either way, it's going to be fun. It's something we've wanted to do for a while, and we are super excited to bring cool stuff like this to you. So, we will see you at the Columbus Moving Picture Show for a little Lon Chaney talk.